everyone. Walker here. Our spring OSN, it will be mailed out at the end of April, last week of April. And we've got a theme for this one, which is lamb survivability and overall flock health. We know you're going to love it. And if you don't tell me because I'm going to cry. And now let's get into today's episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flock Talk. I'm Erin Morgan.
And I'm Walker Ball, and we work for the members of the Ontario Sheep Farmers.
Today on the podcast, we're speaking with Dr. Charlotte Winder, a veterinarian and researcher out of Ontario who's been doing some really interesting work on colostrum and early life health in sheep. Welcome, Charlotte. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So for those of you who may not be familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Oh, for sure. So I'm a veterinarian and an epidemiologist, and I work at the University of Guelph at the Ontario Veterinary College. So my job has a couple of different aspects. So one is teaching. I do a lot of teaching with our ruminant field service, which is a kind of ambulatory farm practice where we teach final year vet students. And then I also do a bit of teaching in terms of lectures and labs for the vet students. And those are primarily centered around teaching about small ruminants. And then research-wise, I have a research program, which when I first started in my role in 2017 was mostly around dairy cattle and dairy calves, but has expanded to include small ruminants. And now I almost solely do research in small ruminants. So I have a number of sheep projects that I'm involved with. And going forward, my goal is to maintain research in small ruminants.
That's amazing. Thank you for the work that you do. We appreciate you.
So what led you to focus your research on colostrum and early life health in sheep?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting one too, in terms of coming from, certainly before I was at the University of Guelph, I was in private practice, and there I did a mix of both like dairy cattle, beef cattle, but also worked with sheep and goat producers too. But in terms of from the research side, coming from more dairy cattle research and moving into small ruminants, this is an interesting topic that way too, because certainly, in all ruminant species, the importance of colostrum has been well identified. Biologically, they're quite different than other species in that they don't get any in utero transfer or practically no in utero transfer of antibodies. And so they're 100% reliant on consuming adequate amounts of good quality colostrum early in life to get those antibodies from their mom in order to start to have some immune protection against pathogens that are going to be present in the environment. So, this is well known in all ruminant species. For sure, there's a lot more research on the cattle side. And even though there's been, tons and tons of research done on the cattle side, there's still research ongoing in that area. And that's something that has, our understanding of it has evolved. Initially, it was more kind of like, do we have enough? Yes or no? Did the calf get enough colostrum to get enough antibodies to protect them? And kind of like, did we get enough calves over the bar to say that we have successful transfer of passive immunity? But now more recent research has shown that it's not just a matter of getting enough or not, getting more is better. And calves that get higher levels of antibodies in early life don't just have decreased risk of mortality, but also have improved growth, improved health. And so we know that basically more is better. So when we translate that to the sheep side, we certainly know that the same principles hold true, and there certainly has been research done in sheep, but far less of it. And the other thing too is the kind of on-farm monitoring that happens fairly routinely on a lot of dairy farms in terms of tracking passive transfer, determining if calves have enough antibodies in their blood in early life, really doesn't exist practically on sheep farms. And then when we go back and look at the research around it, part of the issue is a bit of a research gap. So while we do know we can extrapolate some things from cows, we also know that sheep are not tiny cows. And then the other challenge too with sheep is that we have so many different breeds that are just physiologically like it's so different to carry one lamb as it is to carry like 5 lambs, right? And it's different to be in an accelerated system where ewes are lambing, more than once annually compared to more extensive systems. So we have a lot more more diversity in the industry, which could be relevant in terms of, how those ewes produce colostrum, how those lambs are able to suckle, consume enough, and generate that transfer of passive immunity. And then when we look at the research, where I think in theory we need almost more research in sheep to understand the effect of breed and management system on those things, we have less than we have in cattle. So we do need more research to determine what are the adequate cut points to say if lambs have had successful passive transfer. Do they apply to different breeds and different production styles? And then also, is it the same in calves, as it's not just a cut point? Do we know that maybe more is better? Is it linked to things like production outcomes, as opposed to just protecting you from being less at risk of dying? So kind of looking at that research area was what led us to develop this project, which was funded through OMAFA with support from Ontario sheep farmers, as well as from some support in terms of supporting the project in principle from some producers and producer groups too. So that was awesome. So that was funded a few years ago, and we're almost finished. We have a fantastic graduate student, so PhD student on the project, Jasmine Fraser, who will be finishing up this summer. So she's kind of in the final phases of analysis on this project. And then we also had a fourth year undergrad student, Siobhan Ledavara, who did a project as well. And we looked at another lambing group for her. So she did some analysis on this topic too.
So what was the research question that you were trying to answer in that research project?
Yeah, so the goal of Jasmine's research project was to do an observational study looking at a cohort of ewes. So we had about 300 ewes giving birth to just over 600 lambs, and she followed them from breeding until 100 days after lambing. So we had multiple goals within that. So she was collecting data on them all the way through. It was an observational study, so no interventions on behalf of the research team. We were kind of observing things as they would occur. So our first goal was to assess the use of a Brix refractometer to look at how well total solids, which you can do with a Brix refractometer on farm quite easily, cheaply, how well that correlated with immunoglobulin G concentrations in both lamb serum as well as colostrum. So that work, there has been a little bit of work done on that before, but of course more work is needed to validate it in different breeds and different systems. So that was our first question: is can this simple on-farm tool be used to assess what the antibody levels are in both colostrum and serum? So that's been completed, and that was promising. Both colostrum and serum showed decent agreement. Serum was better than colostrum, which we expected, just because there's more things that can potentially cause variation in total solids in colostrum. But they're both, at the end of the day, they're both good practical tools. So that was good to further contribute to the literature there. Once we had that, then going forward, what we're looking at is, what do those values mean? So if we have those values in the lambs, so lambs had blood taken between 1 and 7 days of age. And then again, we looked at the total solids as well as the total immunoglobulin levels in that blood. And what did that mean in terms of risk of mortality, as well as impact on growth? So lambs were weighed at 50 and 100 days. As well, we're going to look at mortality a little bit more finely, and we have that ability because we have over 600 lambs in the data set, which is actually really exciting too, because one of the challenges, with any research, is we only have so much money and so much time. So sometimes our data sets are somewhat limited, but this is a pretty large data set compared to what's been done before. So we have a little bit more power to look a little bit more granularly than just look at mortality. So we did postmortems on every lamb that died. So we have cause of mortality. We also have time when they died, right? Because certainly, the impact of good transfer of passive immunity on maybe early mortality is maybe different than a little bit later, again, depending on causes. So we're going to look at that a little bit deeper. And then we have our growth rates as well. So we're going to look at that. So that's kind of impact of that transfer of passive immunity on mortality and performance in those lambs. And then going backwards, so looking at, okay, then what predicts those lambs having those values that we want? Then we're going to look at things like the ewe colostrum levels. So how well does that level of antibodies in the colostrum impact those lambs? But then also, how do a bunch of other factors impact those lambs? So factors present at birth, like birth weight, litter size, sex, if there were stillborns in the litter, and then also backing up to those ewes all the way to breeding, because those ewes were looked at for body condition score as well as weight, FAMACHA score, so looking at impact of potential anemia from parasite burden. We also have information on the dams in terms of their age, their parity, so how many litters they've had before, and kind of looking at all of those factors and saying, how did those factors help predict lambs that do well? So ultimately what we want to do is know, okay, do we have this practical tool that can be used on farm to assess transfer of passive immunity? What cut points should we actually be using to say, like, this is good, this is a potential for improvement, or like if we did something to improve it, we'd get better survival, better growth. So what kind of metrics should we be using? And then, what can we be doing? What are the risk factors that impact that better growth and better survival? So if we know that, likely things like birth weight have an influence, but how much is that influence, and then how much do those dam factors influence it too, like older dams, body condition score of dams, potentially parasite load on those dams. So what things can we know ahead of time that are going to set up our ewes to be more likely to have lambs that then have good transfer of passive immunity and subsequently better growth and survival?
Wow, amazing.
Have you been able to sleep, Charlotte?
Oh, well, me, no problem. You should ask Jasmine.
Yeah, Jasmine's the one that's been up all night. Yeah.
I'm like, wow, is that all? Really?
So no, she did. I mean, for some PhD students, they might do a number of projects to because most PhDs are composed of like four research chapters. Her data collection was so substantial that like she's going to have at least 4 publications out of one data set, just because it was so complete. So yeah, she did an amazing job. She's very dedicated. We also had a great team supporting her as well. We had numerous research assistants. Some of our final year veterinary students were up at the farm helping ensure that we got all of this data. So yeah, it was definitely a big effort from Jasmine and her team to collect all this data.
Oh, that's so cool. So based on what you've found so far, what would you say are the most important takeaways for producers if you could distill it down to the key takeaways?
Yeah. So when we don't have all of our analyses done yet,
Sure.
so far, for sure, what we can conclude is we definitely have, and I guess the other thing I should mention, which I didn't mention before, is the flock that we did this study on is an accelerated lambing cycle with Rito Arcot ewes. And the reason why we picked this is certainly we suspect that issues with transfer of passive immunity are going to be compounded on farms that have really prolific breeds and more accelerated lambing cycles. Certainly it could be an issue in all breeds, but that's one of the things that's also a little bit missing from the literature is this kind of work in a more prolific breed. So that's certainly why we chose this as our sample. But yeah, in terms of what we can take away so far, so certainly the Brix had very good agreement for the serum and moderate agreement from the colostrum, which in essence, those are statistical terms, but essentially means it's a good tool. We can use it on farm, especially for serum. It's quite good. For colostrum, it's pretty good, which is practically means it's a tool we can use, which is great because the immunoglobulin levels, that can be done from a research standpoint. We have to send them out and have them done. So practically that's not something that can get done on farm, but certainly Brix refractometer, either on the farm by the veterinarian or at a veterinary clinic, that's certainly a test that can be done. In terms of our cut points, that we haven't figured out yet. That's something that Jasmine's currently working on. Her initial analyses looking at Brix values and mortality risk showed strong associations. This is what we predicted, but it's good to see it in the data that lambs that had higher values, which reflects a higher level of antibodies in their blood, had lower risk of mortality. And the other thing that was interesting too in her preliminary analyses is that these models controlled for things like birth weight, litter size, so certainly things that also predict survival. So certainly in our data set, the bigger you were, the more it was protective against mortality. That would not necessarily be true in all data sets because you can be so big that now you're a dystocia lamb and that's not good. But in our data set, at least, the heavier lambs had better survival, which you might expect. So the impact of Brix is independent of that, if that makes sense. So controlling for the effects of birth weight, Brix is still quite predictive, because you could also assume that like a bigger lamb, maybe they're a little bit more vigorous, maybe they're up and suckling faster, they're not chilled as fast, because these were a group of lambs born in January of last year. So, that's kind of nice to know in the analyses that, even when we're controlling for other factors that also are influential on mortality, we still see a strong effect of Brix. So that's what we know so far. Coming up, though, will be more precise cut points on like what cut points should we be using for like yes, no. And then also, do we have more of a linear relationship, which is what the more recent calf data shows, which is that it's not just a matter of being above a cut point or below, but if we can get more lambs at higher values, are those lambs going to perform better? So this is where she's going to dive into that growth data that she has in terms of adjusted 50 and 100-day weights. And then finally, her last thing that she'll do is look at those impacts of pre-lambing factors and kind of day of lambing factors on that risk of having good transfer of passive immunity. So looking at things that predict that, whether it's things about the litter, like litter size, if they're stillbirths, birth weight, but then also things on the U side. So age, parity, body condition score, that kind of stuff.
Well, that's going to be really interesting when we get all the data.
Yes, very excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So from a practical standpoint, what should producers be doing to help maximize colostrum management?
Yeah, that's a great question. So certainly the importance of colostrum likely is never overstated. Practically, sometimes that's really hard in terms of how to implement it. And I think on sheep farms, we have unique challenges as well, especially with the role of replacer products. So replacer products are great. And if we need to use replacer products, I think people should be using them, because colostrum plays, I guess, multiple roles in terms of helping that newborn lamb. So, I mean, this project is focused a lot around passive transfer, so getting those antibodies into the lambs. But obviously, it has much more of an impact too, because it's their food. So, from a nutritional standpoint, because colostrum has all the fat, protein, energy that they need, and especially those lambs that are born in the middle of January, they need that fuel right away for them to be able to not chill, be able to, do well and grow. And so certainly colostrum replacer offers all of that, right? So colostrum replacer has nutritionally, especially colostrum replacers that are balanced for lambs, has, all those macronutrients that are really important for survival early in life. One of the challenges, though, that we have on the sheep side globally compared to cattle is all colostrum products are from bovine source. I mean, they're manufactured in ways that basically prevent disease transfer, so they're very safe from that standpoint. But the antibodies that are present in them are from cows. And I guess I should have mentioned this before, but the worst thing, which I hope no one does, is getting like cow colostrum from a dairy farm. Because one of the advantages of the powdered colostrum is it's like nutritionally formulated for lambs, plus it's like been screened for diseases, versus if you go to your local dairy farm and get colostrum, like you have no idea what's in it, and it's bovine source. So like if you're going to feed bovine source, just buy the powder. But yeah. And so how much protection does that offer lambs? It's pretty questionable. We have a lot of lambs in our data set because, again, we have like over 600 lambs in the data set that have received a colostrum supplementation, because again, this was an observational study, so we just followed animals as they would be managed according to the farm protocols. So some lambs in this cohort got colostrum replacer, some of them got replacer but then stayed on their mom, some of them got colostrum from their mom, but then maybe at day 2 or 3 weren't doing well and then were placed on an auto feeder, and then others, would have been pulled off right away, given colostrum replacer and put on the auto feeder right away. So that's another thing that I didn't mention, but she has lots of analyses to do. So another thing Jasmine will be looking at is what are the impacts of those things on survival as well as passive transfer or transfer of passive immunity. So anyway, all that to say, colostrum replacer is a great product and can be the difference between survival and not survival in lambs. And so I don't want to discourage people from using it. It's important to recognize, though, that it doesn't contain sheep antibodies in it. And so in an ideal world, lambs would consume colostrum from their dam I mean, if it was some sort of ideal world where you could just make things happen with a snap of your fingers, you could have banked colostrum from other ewes. And I mean, certainly some farms may do this, but practically, I mean, this may not be an option for all farms. I know certainly like on the dairy sheep side, that's something that's much more possible. I mean, milking meat sheep, as anybody maybe has known that has tried to do this, or our poor PhD student and research students, because we were getting colostrum samples, like that's not an easy task to milk.
I can't imagine. What a rodeo.
Yeah. And we were only trying to get a little sample. So, I mean, certainly like if that's something that can be done, that's going to have sheep specific antibodies. It's going to have antibodies that those ewes are generating from exposure to pathogens on their own farm. So it's got a lot more local protection. So that's great. If it can be done, again, recognizing that that's, not something that maybe can happen everywhere. So certainly colostrum replacer can be a fantastic tool on many farms. Ideally, trying to get as many lambs as possible to consume colostrum from their dam is going to be very important too. And then on the other side, kind of setting them up for success. And again, we haven't finished all of our analyses on this, but things like optimizing body condition score throughout gestation to make sure ewes are lambing in good enough shape that they probably have lots of good quality colostrum, that they're going to be producing lambs with an optimal birth weight. Again, like not giant, but adequate in terms of both size, because of course size can help with things like chilling, but also fat stores, right? Like, so the lambs that are a little bit heavier are going to have more fat stores, going to be a little bit hardier. And so thinking of things like that pre-lambing can certainly be helpful.
Excellent.
Yeah. So what role do veterinarians play in improving colostrum management, and where can they have the biggest impact?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think one of the things that hopefully can come out of our work is that, because that was one question we had at the beginning, because we knew we were going to be taking blood samples on these 600 lambs, and we enrolled a farm that was very supportive of the research project, but we were, of course, a little bit worried, is this going to work practically? Are we going to, make sure we don't stress those lambs out, and that everything goes well? But that part went incredibly well. And the other thing too, because coming from cattle, we wanted to make sure that we could work with very small volumes of blood, and still have, we had to have more than we would need if we were just doing the kind of on-farm Brix sampling, because we had to ship some away for immunoglobulin G level testing. But anyway, one thing that came out of this is it's certainly something that can be done on farm with very small amount of blood and low stress to the lamb. And so certainly I think this is something, especially if a farm is struggling with pre-weaning mortality in lambs that aren't doing very well, talking to your veterinarian, having your veterinarian involved in kind of problem solving that. One tool that could be used is taking a blood sample, having your veterinarian come and take some blood samples on lambs, again, between that kind of 1 and 7 day of age range, can give you kind of an idea on how well things are going at the population level in terms of transfer of passive immunity. And that can at least be a useful tool. Of course, there's lots of other things to look at too, but that could be something that could be done to say, okay, do we think part of this mortality issue is coming from an issue with transfer of passive immunity? Or is that, maybe that's good and it's something that's happening after that's more of the issue? So I think it can be a tool in terms of pinpointing, where there's opportunities for improvement on farm. It's certainly something that can be done in a practical manner that isn't too invasive or too stressful on the lambs.
Excellent. So we'll talk about knowledge transfer now and getting research into practice, GRIP, as Mike McMorris always talks about. Why do you think that there's a gap sometimes between what research recommends and what's happening practically on the farm?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I guess one thing is, looking at the research itself, because, research usually is answering one question or maybe a couple of questions in a specific population. And sometimes it's hard to generalize stuff from research to the whole population. And again, this is where, my research tends to be more on the applied end. But again, going from maybe more controlled studies to things that are happening more on commercial farms in multiple population settings. And this is also what we hope to do going forward with this research. But I guess on the research side, looking for things that are quite applied in terms of being able to generalize them to a farm. If not, kind of looking at maybe differences between the study population and the industry. So sometimes it's a challenge there in terms of like, is it even generalizable? But I think probably the bigger gap isn't necessarily that. The bigger gap is also like just having the information, not just having the information out there, but having that like two-way communication. Because I mean, we can learn things in research, but we don't know all of the practical limitations of implementing knowledge in research to the on-farm setting, right? And I mean, research projects are limited in scope, right? We can only answer so many questions. And one of the other challenges too is, even if we learn like, yes, this is beneficial for X, Y, or Z reason, ultimately the next question is, does it pay, right? I mean, sometimes things are quite clear when it's like, okay, this reduces mortality by X percentage, and it's something that can be implemented with very low costs. So, maybe some things are clearer, but in other cases, things are a lot less clear. And also the specific economic advantage is probably going to depend on the farm too. So I think having that like two-way conversation is really important, both in how research is interpreted, but also in terms of, well, what do we do next? Like, what are the next questions that producers have in terms of like, okay, if we learn that, yes, transfer of passive immunity, if we learn, yes, it's really important, it's potentially limiting cause, how common is this actually on Ontario farms? And like, what are the practical challenges with implementing, any strategies to improve some of those risk factors? So, I mean, I think like this specific research is designed to answer more of a like scientific question around passive transfer, but certainly having more kind of knowledge translation research in terms of like identifying, okay, if we maybe know something scientifically, but it's not matching what's happening in the industry, why is that happening? So doing kind of research on the knowledge translation efforts, or doing research in terms of asking producers, going to farms, figuring out what the actual challenges are in terms of implementation. Because I think a lot of times it's not that we don't have the knowledge, it's that the knowledge doesn't match like what the actual challenges are on the farm. So maybe that's a long answer, but yeah, many different ways to do that. I guess, and maybe one of the other things I should also mention too, is I think that's one of the benefits too of having a team working on the farm, kind of multiple players, but from a veterinary standpoint, certainly I think the veterinarian, but like nutritionist, other folks on the table as well, depending on what issues we're working with, but helping individual farms in terms of like if they're experiencing some sort of challenge, and then also trying to decide, okay, for this particular farm with these particular challenges, what actually makes sense from the research in terms of how can we improve things.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, good points.
Yeah, very good points.
Yeah. So if we're looking at the bigger picture, what happens for both lamb health and farm economics when colostrum management isn't done well?
Yeah, I think with this one, like there's a pretty clear correlation with mortality, and certainly that's a large potential loss for a farm. Depending on when the mortality occurs, I mean, there's certainly opportunity loss when we lose lambs. If we have more stillborn lambs than we would have otherwise, those are opportunities for lambs to have been productive and become a replacement animal or a market animal. But also to like colostrum, certainly the impacts of colostrum from a nutrient standpoint are going to show up early in life in terms of lambs dying of like in the wintertime, hypothermia, hypoglycemia, maybe lambs dying of infectious disease like E. coli early in life. But potentially colostrum can have benefits later on, right? So it maybe also is transferring things like antibodies to respiratory pathogens or even just generally improving the immune system so the lambs aren't experiencing multiple immune challenges as they're growing. And certainly there's potential for an impact of that early life intervention on mortality, even in post-weaning period. And I think those losses are probably even worse, right? Because if we have mortality later on, those are lambs that have had lots of inputs invested in them, and for them to die, in that even late pre-weaning or post-weaning stage, that represents quite a bit of economic loss.
So, Charlotte, what's next for your research? Where do you think you're going to go from here?
Yeah, so we're really excited to continue this research. What we would really like to do is get this a little bit more expanded to the Ontario sheep population. So what we'd really like to do next is to, if we can establish, what ideal cut points are for, what's a level that would be considered a pass, how many lambs need to pass in a sample to be, considered that we have good transfer of passive immunity on a farm. But then what we want to do is go and do kind of a much larger on-farm study, less intensive, less data collected, but more representative of the Ontario population. So basically go out, hopefully enroll lots of farms, different geographic areas, different breeds, different management styles, find out when they're lambing, come and take some blood samples on lambs, get some information on those lambs, follow them to see mortality risk, and then try to see, number one, how big of a problem is transfer of passive immunity on Ontario farms? Like, is it a big problem or not? And then also further validate, are our cut points going to be useful for different breeds and different management systems? And then also look at the farm level, what factors are associated with risk of having passive transfer issues on a farm? Can we pinpoint, like, how big of a problem is this in the industry, and where specifically is this challenge more likely to occur? So therefore, maybe we can better target things like knowledge transfer and further kind of help troubleshoot to hopefully improve things like early life mortality on Ontario sheep farms. Wow.
This is really great work. I appreciate that you're doing it. This is fantastic. Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah.
Thank you
Massive.
thanks for having me. And yeah, I mean, we're very lucky to work with really lovely producers and to work with the Ontario sheep industry. And yeah, we look forward to doing more work with Ontario sheep farms in the future.
Yeah, well, we look forward to seeing your results really soon as well. So probably will it be this summer or fall that we will start to see some results?
Yes, we should have everything complete by the end of the summer. And then, Jasmine's publications will start to come out this fall. But certainly, for those of you tuning into the podcast, hopefully keep up to date with Ontario sheep farmers because we'll be sharing what we learn with you guys, and then hopefully communicating those key findings to producers.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Charlotte.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Flock Talk, please subscribe through your podcast app to receive alerts to our future episodes. And please share our podcast with your friends.
For more Ontario Sheep Farmers content, follow us on social media on Instagram and Facebook at Ontario Sheep Farmers, and visit our website, ontariosheep.org, for more resources.